attendees come in.
Okay.
Okay. I hope there is no echo and everyone can hear me.
We can hear you perfectly fine.
Okay, great. Attendees who are already here, thank you for being here. We're just going to start in 1 minute. All right, let's get started. Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Aisha Siddiqui, and I'm an advisor in the Lahore office of Education USA Pakistan. Thank you so much for being here today. Our event is all about the MFA program in creative writing. So I think it's going to be a good one. We have two amazing panelists with us who I will introduce in just a second. I'm also joined by my colleague Aman. He will take over if there's any glitch or internet issue. But thank you, Aman, also. And the panelists we have are Annaka Saari and Bilal Tanweer. Annaka is a writer from Jackson, Michigan, and she has a BA in English from the University of Michigan, and she has an MFA in creative writing from Boston University, where she is now the administrative coordinator for the program in creative writing. She is also the recipient of a Florence Engel Randall Graduate Fiction Prize and a Robert Pinsky Global Fellowship. So Annaka has a lot of insight for you guys. Thank you for being here. Bilal, I'm sure you've already heard of. He is a novelist. He wrote The Scatter Here Is Too Great, which won the Shakti Bhatt First Book Prize and was shortlisted for the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature. He has written extensively. He has also translated. He holds an MFA in writing from Columbia, which he received a Fulbright scholarship for. He also teaches comparative literary and cultural studies at LUMS. So together they will talk about the technicalities that are involved in applying to an MFA program. Annaka, as an HEI rep, also has slides for us. They will also talk about what an MFA program is all about and what their own personal experiences were like. So if this is something that you have ever considered, just stay tuned. I really think this is going to be a good hour for you. Before I hand it over to them, I'm just going to quickly run you through what we do here at Education USA. So I'm just going to take a minute of your time. Just going to share my slides. Okay, can everyone see this? Okay, great. So we here at Education USA, what is Education USA? It's a network of advising centers, and we're pretty much all over the globe. We are under the umbrella of the US Department of State, and we are the official resource to anything to do with US higher education. This is where you come to find your best fit university. We can help you through that process, shortlisting, applying, everything. We can help you put your best foot forward. And the cool thing is not, almost all our services are 100% free. So you have one-on-one advising, which is great. You have in-house sessions, you have free workshops for GRE, SAT, TOEFL. Before there was access to our resource library, but right now it's kind of closed because of the pandemic. But we are hoping to open it soon. So just keep in touch about that if that's something you're interested in. Other than that, we are based within the USCFP in Pakistan. So we have offices in Islamabad, Karachi, and Lahore. But students from all over the country are welcome to get in touch with us. We will advise you to the best of our abilities. And these are the 5 steps to education in the USA. It doesn't matter where on this horizontal timeline you fall in, like whatever step you're on, you need help, just send us an email and we'll be happy to get in touch. This is the website you need to take note of. Please go here. There's all the information you need. And these are the email addresses. Just write to the one closest to you if you have any questions. I am going to stop sharing my screen now. Thank you. Okay. And Annaka, can you take it from here now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Aisha. Hi, all. As said in the introduction, my name is Annaka, and I have some slides to share with y'all as well. Forgive me, I should say, if I sound a little scratchy. I am in my parents' basement home from Boston, so it is a little bit dusty here. But I will begin sharing my slides. All right. Can everybody see that? Awesome.
Yes, I can.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So y'all, I am here from Boston University, and I am going to tell you all a little bit about the basic application process when it comes to applying for MFA programs. We'll talk a little bit about financial aid, and as the administrator for BU's program, I get a lot of questions. So I'm going to give you some answers to common questions that come up, and we can answer your questions at the end as well. But just a little bit of brief introduction. As Aisha already said, I do have a BA in English from the University of Michigan and an MFA from Boston University. I just graduated in September of this year. So the information you'll be getting from me comes from both an administrator standpoint and a recent student standpoint. And I guess the first thing we should talk about is, how do you decide where to apply when you've decided, I really want to pursue writing in this serious way? I know I want to study in the United States. What are the kind of things you look at? This is an email I get almost constantly. How do I choose? And my answer to them is always another question. Well, who are you? What is important to you as a student? So some of the common things we see that differ between program to program are cohort size. At Boston University, we have a cohort of 10 fiction writers and 8 poets. Schools like the University of Michigan, Iowa, they are much bigger. This is going to result in a different experience for you as a student. Do you want more one-on-one with time with faculty in a smaller, closer-knit cohort? Or do you want to be part of a larger community of writers? That is something that you should heavily consider when thinking what program might work for you. Another thing is reputation of the program. And when I say this, I don't mean ideas of prestige or what school is quote unquote better, but what type of work do these programs have a reputation for producing? If you're a poet, Brown University is famous more recently for producing some really exciting experimental work that isn't being encouraged in more traditional institutions. But if you consider yourself more of a traditionalist as a poet, someplace like Boston University or Johns Hopkins might be more hospitable to the kind of work you are producing. So ask yourself, who am I as a writer? What programs do I think would foster the style in which I wish to improve the best? Another obvious one is faculty. Who do you want to work with? Who would excite you as a professor? Robert Pinsky is a 3-time US Poet Laureate. We have him at Boston University. The University of Michigan has Khalid Matawa, who is a wonderful translator. Who do you want to work with? What do you want to do? Financial aid and funding is perhaps the most important. This is what I tell students or prospective students, I should say, constantly. Funding should be the first thing you look at when you are looking at programs, because you have to make sure that you have the ability to exist as a human before you can exist as a writer. Are you going to have the ability to eat and live in this city? And are you going to be able to do so in a way that allows you to get work done? Some schools give you full funding, some give you partial funding. If you go to a school that gives you partial funding and you do not have a significant backlog of savings, you are probably going to have to work at least part-time during your MFA. Is that something that you can do or that you are willing to do? These are questions you have to ask yourself before you apply. Teaching requirements and opportunities. Some schools will require you to teach a class or more than one class during your course of the MFA to acquire funding. At Boston University, all of our students teach at least one course while they are at BU. So everybody will teach either Intro to Creative Writing or will teach at a local high school a similar course. Some schools require you to teach more. Some schools say you don't have to teach, but we're not giving you funding unless you do teach. These are things that you should think about. Do you want to be a teacher? Is that something that is just a side effect of you wanting to get this MFA? Some students are attracted by schools that will give them more teaching opportunities. Some students would rather not. Location is another big one. Where do you want to relocate to? Where do you have the ability to relocate to? Some cities are significantly more expensive than others, which will tie in again with your financial aid and funding. A city like Boston is much more expensive than a state living anywhere in the state of Iowa. So you get you get more funding at one place, but you probably have to spend less at another. Program length is another. Most MFA programs are 2 to 3 years long. That is a pretty large commitment of time. BU's is a 1-year program. That is kind of a unique situation there. But think about how much time can I and do I want to commit to this study of writing? And that can tie into with location too. Do I want to spend 3 years in the state of Florida? Do I want to spend 1 year in the city of Boston? Do I want to spend two years here, 3 years there, what have you? Alumni and students at these programs that you are considering applying to are a fantastic resource if the program allows you to contact them. At BU, we have a short list of alumni who are willing to talk to prospective students, and some other schools have this as well. Additionally, if you are admitted to a program and you are considering accepting an offer, that is a fantastic time to say, "Hi, faculty, I'm very happy that you've given me this offer. Are there any current students I could speak to hear more about what it's actually like at your program?" And then finally, low residency versus full residency. Some schools allow you to do the low residency model, which means you go for short amounts of time, you are on campus for short amounts of time dealing with faculty and spend the majority of the year back at your home base, wherever that is, usually working a full-time job. Full residency, which is the more traditional model of MFA, means you relocate, you live in Boston for a year now, this is what you do. So low residency programs, off the top of my head, Warren Wilson is one that I have heard is fantastic, may allow you more flexibility in your pursuit of the MFA. So those residency models are just something to consider as well. So we've decided that we've picked our list of schools, say. You've got these 8 schools that you really feel confident in applying to. What is that application going to look like? So the first is basically the common application that you likely did when you applied to university the first time around. So basic information, here's my name, here's my address, bing, bang, boom, we can do that quickly, no problem. Then it gets a lot more complicated. We have the writing sample, the personal statement, your letters of recommendation, past transcripts from any university you attended, your resume and CV, and then the big dot at the end, anything else they ask for. So any supplemental information that is requested by these programs. Some programs may include additional financial aid forms, a statement of purpose, a statement of teaching philosophy. Really, these main bullet points at the top are what you're going to see from every program. That bullet point at the bottom, we'll just see what other programs ask us for and go from there. But let's start with the writing sample because this is the most important part of your application. As someone who is currently screening applications for Boston University's program now, I can say that if you have an arresting, interesting writing sample, you will move on for further consideration. If your writing sample does not interest the application readers, it will likely not get passed along to the faculty. So for this reason, your writing sample should contain the stories or poems, depending on what genre you're working in, those that you consider to be your best work. when people come to me and ask, how do I pick these poems? How do I pick these stories? It is often helpful to speak to other friends you may have that are writers. If you have a trusted teacher who is helping you apply, these should be your best works, not works that you think show certain skills or show certain range, but what is your best work? That is a failure that we often see in applications, where people will submit a large breadth of works that vary in quality because they are trying to show us that they can do multiple different things. Multiple different things is nice if they are all done well, but what we look for all around is a solidly written application. If these 5 poems are fantastic, but the other 5 are we are going to err on the side of the guy who turned in 10 great poems all around, even if they are more similar than the 5 and 5. Another thing to consider is the required size and formatting of the writing sample, because this often will vary from program to program. When I was applying, I had most of my schools ask me for a sheaf of 10 to 12 poems. I had one school ask me for 20. So it's really important to read that fine print, because you don't want to be wasting an opportunity by only turning in 10 poems when they asked for 20, or vice versa, giving them much too much work when they asked for only a certain amount of pages. This information, also if there are any special formatting examples, will usually be found on programs' website, will usually be quite accessible. So we've gotten our poems or our stories together, and we run into the question of, what should I put in my personal statement? So your personal statement is the opportunity to tell those reviewing your applications about your experiences, goals, influences as a writer. It's really the place to tell us what the writing sample does not. So if you have important notes from your biography that you think it is really important for the reviewing board to know, if you say, I think I am in conversation with Robert Lowell or with Langston Hughes, and you think that is very important for the reviewing board to know, this is the place to put that. This should be a brief portrait of yourself as a writer, and a portrait of who the reviewing board would think you would be as a literary citizen in their program. Additionally, this is something we see a lot, so please take note. If you are using one statement for many schools, double, triple check to ensure that you send the sample with the correct school's name substituted in. Every year we get applications to Boston University that say students are really excited to study at Duke University or at the University of Florida, and that's fantastic. We're excited for them. But that does, if you have a fantastic writing sample, it's not going to matter, to be fair. But that does make us think, perhaps this person hasn't double, triple checked their samples as much as the other guys have. And you want to appear as well prepared and as well-rounded as you can. Letters of recommendation. So like most schools, Boston University requires the basic 2 to 3 letters of recommendation alongside your application. Ideally, and I say ideally, these letters should come from someone who knows you as a student and or as a writer. So really the perfect scenario is we all have old professors from English or creative writing courses that know us as a student, know us as a writer. But I want to stress that they are not the only good candidates for letter writers. If you are someone who has been out of school for a while, if you are someone who did not study English as an undergraduate, an MFA program is still perfectly within your reach. One of our students at BU this year has a major in chemistry. We have admitted students who majored in music, who majored in philosophy. You just need someone who can speak to your ability to undertake graduate coursework and be a part of a literary community. So I often tell people, if you don't have a creative writing professor, have you ever been a part of a writing group? Have you ever been part of an informal workshop? Do you have, say you studied psychology, do you have a teacher from the psychology department who can attest to your ability to undertake serious coursework and participate in class conversations or in peer reviews? Do not panic if you do not have the ideal letter writers. Just make sure that you have someone who can show that program who you are as a writer, as a student, who they're signing on for. Past transcripts, this is really easy. These transcripts are usually just uploaded directly into the application portal. Most schools will accept an unofficial transcript until your official transcript becomes available. So if you are finishing an undergraduate degree, or because of ongoing COVID issues, your school is not issuing transcripts at the time, fear not. Most schools will allow you to turn that in even past the application deadline, as long as you can provide them with an unofficial transcript to move forward. Resume and CV. I'm not going to explain the basics of that, because y'all have a, if you're applying to MFA programs, y'all have a grasp on that. But just make sure that it's easy to read. Formatting wise, clean and professional is definitely much better than showy and decorative. And we do get that a lot, where it'll be like a beautiful resume, but we're like staring at it, trying to figure out where this person went to college. So if you could please just make that clean, concise, the review board will thank you, and it'll make it easier for them to see your accomplishments and your achievements. And please don't panic if you don't have any past writing publications. We get this question a lot. Am I allowed to apply to your program if I haven't published a poem or published a story? Of course, we are interested in developing writers at all stages of their careers, and most programs are the same way. If you have not published a poem or published a story, just submit your best work and do not worry about that. We admit writers every year who have never published a thing, and we admit writers who are well published. It's about the sample you turn in. That's what you're being judged on, not your past accomplishments. Financial aid and funding. Funding and financial aid opportunities will vary from program to program. So for example, Boston University provides tuition remission, health insurance, and a stipend of at least $16,750 to all incoming students. All students receive these benefits upon being admitted and do not have to fill out any additional paperwork to be considered for these funds. However, a lot of schools are very different. So some schools will say, we'll give you this much money coming in, but if you want to apply for this scholarship, give us this form by April 15th. Other schools will say, all of you get this amount of funding, but you'll be considered automatically for additional funding. Make sure you read the fine print on these websites for the programs you're applying to. And if you are concerned, email the administrator. There should be an email somewhere for contact info for the program. Don't be afraid to ask these questions. These are extremely important to you as an applicant. And if you're going to pay that application fee, you should be sure of what you're getting if you do gain admission. So do not fear, that is the administrator's job. We are happy to answer any questions about financial aid that you might have. I'm going to give you a quick overview of BU's program. BU is a 32 credit course that can be completed in 2 to 3 semesters and in 1 calendar year. Our course load consists of four credit writing workshops in the genre in which you are admitted. So that would be poetry or fiction. Note that other schools have screenwriting programs, playwriting programs, and nonfiction programs. So if you're interested in something outside of that, BU is probably not for you. But four credit graduate level literature courses are also required. We have a large English department at BU, so there's usually something that everybody is interested in. We do require that students demonstrate proficiency in a language other than English during their time in the program. So there are many different ways to do this. I completed a translation project in Finnish. Other students take exams, take a reading German course, or are simply multilingual. So there are multiple ways to fulfill that requirement. And then, of course, the crowning jewel of any MFA program is that thesis. At BU, our theses are at least 35 pages of poetry or 95 pages of prose, and it must be approved and signed by 2 members of faculty at BU. Boston University also has a fun program called the Global Fellowship. Because of the support of a very generous donor, our program offers students funds to travel outside of the United States for up to 3 months after completing coursework. These grants are about roughly $4,500 to $5,000, depending on the genre in which the student studies. I have received funding to go to Finland. Our alumni have traveled to every continent with the exception of Antarctica. In the last 5 years, we've had students in Greece, Germany, the Balkans, Senegal, France, pretty much anywhere you can think of, we've had students. So if travel is something that is of interest to you as a writer, this might be something that excites you about BU's program. And then just last few things, BU has the famous translation seminar in which students undertake a semester-long translation project with the help of a mentor in their source language. So BU connected me with a professor at the University of the Arts in Helsinki to work on my Finnish project, which I thought was very exciting and just a very fun and informative experience. We have a partnership with a local high school, which allows 4 of our students every year who are more interested in teaching at the high school level rather than at the college level to teach creative writing at this local performing arts high school. We have our own student-run reading series. So if you're someone who's interested in arts administration or in dipping your toe into organizing events, that's a fun thing that some of our students do. The artist book projects allow interested poets to pair up with students from our visual arts school at Boston University to work on collaborative projects that illustrate one of the poet's poems. So these usually take the form of an illustrated book, but in the past have also taken the form of small works of sculpture, small installations. It's really interesting to see every year. And I think if you're someone who's interested in interdisciplinary arts, that might be something that is of interest. Boston University also allows students to replace some of their literature courses with courses outside of the English department. So I was allowed to take a course called Writing About Jazz in our music department. Some other students take classes in comparative literature, gastronomy, the famous Editorial Institute. I had the ability to work with the critic Christopher Ricks, which was life-changing as a writer. You have flexibility at BU, and that's part of why I picked the program. And then finally, if you're someone who's interested in literary magazines and how things behind the scenes work, Boston University is home to a brilliant magazine called Agni. They recently just dropped a new issue that was full of beautiful translated poetry, so I would highly recommend checking that out if that's of interest. But Agni allows MFA students at Boston University to be editorial assistants. So I spent 5 hours a week there, copy editing and working with the poems and the stories of really exciting writers, both established and new. So I found that to be a very useful experience. And people are usually, when they see that on my resume, are like, how did you do that? And I'm like, well, BU kind of did that for me. So that's my pitch. Will be happy to answer any questions that y'all have for me at the end. But for now, I think I should pass it back to Aisha.
Thanks, Annaka. That was super helpful. I think, yeah, we've already gotten a few questions, but let's go to Bilal now. Bilal, thank you for being here. So basically, we have a lot of students who are very excited to see you online with us right now. Annaka, you might not know this, but Bilal has kind of a fan following in the writing circles here in Pakistan. So Bilal, basically, what we wanted to know from you was, as someone who is a Pakistani writer writing in the English language, and as someone who's helped countless students also pursue their writing careers, what was your MFA experience like? And do you have any advice for students who are interested in pursuing an MFA themselves?
Yeah, thank you, Aisha. Thank you first of all for inviting me, and Annaka for that wonderful presentation. I think makes it was really wonderful, and actually I took some notes as well. Aisha, my own experience as an MFA, I think I when I went for an MFA program, nobody knew much about MFA programs, and in fact, I think I was the first person I knew, from people who were around me who went for an MFA program. In fact, even when I went for my Fulbright interview, I think I had to explain to them what MFA meant, Masters in Fine Arts. So it was a really kind of a strange and a kind of a singular thing at that time. But I think now people know about it, and people know that they can pursue a degree in fiction writing. So my own experience, I think that, again, the reason why I'm saying this is because I was not prepared for what an MFA degree looked like. I was going After my undergraduate, I had worked for a year as a journalist in Karachi. And so I went there thinking that it would be something like my undergraduate classes, but it was something significantly different because classes were led by writers. And at the heart of it was this thing that we call the workshop, which is where, a lot of, your peers essentially gather around a table and you talk about, each other's work. You critique it, so as to say. And again, it's a certain way of reading in which you basically train yourself. And that's, what MFAs sort of pride themselves on. It's called the craft method, or I don't know, reading for craft rather. So I think that it was a kind of a novel experience. And again, as I said earlier, there was nothing that could prepare me for it. There was no such pedagogy available to me when I went. So I think it took me a little while to get a hang of it, and then I kind of understood it and got used to it. So so I think the program that I went to was Columbia University, which has always been a big program with lots of writers, lots of star writers. And I mean, you get a chance to interact with them. But as Annaka was saying, that having a big program is not necessarily a great thing. I mean, not for everyone's temperament. And so I felt that perhaps what I lacked, or the kind of attention I did not get in that program, and I'm not necessarily saying that this as a critique, perhaps it suits certain temperaments, just not mine, was that I did not get that sort of an attention from my professors, outside of the classroom. So once the workshop was over, we had to have a 1-hour conference with our workshop mentor to discuss whatever we submit individually with the instructor. But after that, there was nothing else, right? So once that was done, it was difficult to meet your professors, because obviously every writers are busy, and they have this chronic feeling that life is running out and we are all going to die before we finish our books. So I think that I completely sympathize with them, but I think that that's sort of a large cohort. And also I think that the structure of classes, there were very few classes that I took with people that I overlapped with other people in my cohort. So there was very little sense of being in a cohort, is what I'm trying to say. You just attended classes, and in every class you found new faces. And so it was a kind of a more fragmentary experience for me. And again, someone who had traveled out of Pakistan for the first time, living in a new place for the first time. New York was extremely intimidating. Remember, this is again a time where Facebook had just come onto the scene. Gmail was new, for example, right? Gmail was perhaps 2 years old at this time. So again, there was very little information on the web. Web wasn't like what it is today. So I think it was it was a very different sort of an experience for me. So the other thing that I want to perhaps comment on is what I learned during my kind of time at Columbia, was that the big names, the star writers, are not necessarily going to be the best teachers, or they are not necessarily going to be more invested in you and in your development as a writer. So I think that that's something to bear in mind, because again, when we are applying to programs, or when we are looking for programs, we kind of look for our favorite writers, or writers who really excite us, or who are being covered by the New York Times, Sunday Book Review, in a big way. So I would say that do not fall for that. I mean, do look up the reputation of the teacher, of the writers as teachers. I mean, I'm sure you can find this information now. I think there's Rate My Professors and so on, because one of the things that I learned was that the writers I learned most from, and in fact who gave me the most rigorous feedback on my own writing, and who read my work most carefully, were the ones who were not necessarily the biggest name, not at that time at least, Now they might be much bigger than they were then. So so I think that that's something that I always advise my own kind of students when they come to me for advice. Um, and I think that the other thing to bear in mind, and I think this is very, very important, right, is that, you know, MFA programs are small, right? Even the biggest programs are small, right? You know, you have to keep that in mind, that the admissions and as Anna said, that each one has a certain kind of a reputation, has a certain kind of a, you may say, a flavor, or the kind of writing that they are known for, and that simply comes out of the cohort of faculty that is teaching there. You know, it's usually MFA programs are founded by one or two faculty members who kind of, to put it bluntly, they hire their friends, or people that they admire, and they, here you go, we have an MFA program, right? 4 or 5 writers, and usually, programs are really, that size. I mean, some of them are bigger, like Columbia, but that's how it happens. And so, each program has a certain kind of writing that they are kind of looking for. So it's very important to realize, if you don't get admitted into MFA programs, it's not the end of the world. Okay, it's not a judgment on your writing. It's not a judgment on your ability as a writer, because I have seen this happen. And again, it's really saddening for me personally, because couple of them are really brilliant, like some of the most brilliant writers that I have seen and I've taught over the last 10 years, that they got so disheartened because they did not get into an MFA program, that they kind of one actually gave up writing, and the other one kind of went into a kind of semi-depression. So I just want to kind of highlight that admissions in MFA programs are extremely subjective, and extremely competitive, right? I think Annaka was saying this just before we went live, that this year they received over 800 applications and they admitted 18 people. That's 1/8. So just bear that in mind. It's a very, very, very competitive scenario, and there is no objective measure with which you can be sure that your application would make it or not, right? I mean, I have a student who got admitted to UT Austin's program, full funding and everything, and the thing that the person who kind of offered them admission, they said that your writings, your statement was the one that, because it was so funny. It was his personal, he wrote about his personal journey as a writer, and how he went from being an undergraduate, I think, in economics, to MA in linguistics, and then to applying to an MFA program. So he kind of wrote a very, very funny statement. I read the statement, it was hilarious. That the person who read it, he said she kind of got up and he made a call while they were discussing all the rest of the applications. They got so excited with this statement. So all I'm trying to say is that it's I mean, I'll give you my example. I got rejected from all other schools except for Columbia, which was my first choice, and this happened 2 years in a row. So I finally got funding for Columbia, because Columbia is also famous for not offering much funding, and so I got funding through the Fulbright. So very grateful for that. But I think just bear that in mind. It's extremely, extremely subjective. And what else? Finally, but the other thing that I have to tell you is that do not fund your MFA degree yourself, ever. I have seen this, and don't take loans from relatives. Don't make your relatives sign on to bonds for an MFA degree. Do it for, if you're going to Wharton, or you're going to, study law or whatever, or medicine, but don't do it for an MFA program. Because, and I've seen this, right? I mean, people who were in my own program, they thought that because Columbia has admitted them, they were amazing writers. And now they will, end up with some sort of $1 million book deal, or if not $1 million, a few $100,000 deal at least, and they would be able to pay off their loans. And 1 and a half year into the program, it begins to dawn on them that no such thing exists. And just because they went to Columbia does not even mean that they are necessarily great writers. And so once these things begin to dawn on you, it becomes really, really difficult. I saw these friends, really suffer for many years, in fact, after their degree, because they were under a lot of loans, and they were struggling to pay them while trying to carry on as writers, because again, writing does not pay. That's the truth of it. You might get a deal, but even then, even a decent deal, I mean, even if you get like $50,000 advance for a book, that's nothing. I mean, you put in 5 years of work and get $50,000. That's absolutely nothing. So think. I mean, I'm very, very clear about this. Do not ever take a loan to do an MFA degree. It's much better to not do an MFA degree and do an online workshop or a series of workshops and writing classes rather than going for an MFA program. I know it's not a substitute, but it's not. I won't ever recommend taking a loan for an MFA. So those are a few thoughts from my own experience. I will be happy to speak more. I'm sure Annaka will have more to say as well. But thank you, Aisha.
Thanks, Bilal. Those were some really good insights. So just a quick point. A lot of your students have recently gotten into MFA programs, right? So
Right.
were they able to secure funding? Just so I want to give our students like the idea that there is funding available. Like,
Right. Yeah. So all my students who have been admitted, and I think there is on average, I think for the last 4 years at least, I would say there are at least 2 to 3 people who are getting admissions in MFA programs in North America.
okay.
And they get funding. They do get funding every year because there are so many MFA programs. And I think now, there are many programs that are actually actively looking to diversify as well. So, there is always that opportunity when you are an applicant from Pakistan that you will have slightly better chance, but again, that's not true for all programs. Many programs are already very diverse, so they're not necessarily looking to do it as an affirmative action thing, but some programs are. So I think that's an opening there. But I think, again, but as Annaka said, I'm just going to reinforce that. Do not try to kind of fashion your writing sample in a way that you think that'll make it more, I don't know, appeal to some keyword or something like that. Don't do that. Just send in your best work and then let other people decide whether you are the right candidate for their program. So yes, all my students, all of them actually without any exception, have funding. And have gotten funding for the last whatever number of years, except for maybe 1 or 2 who were American citizens, and so they, their fee was low, and then they were able to get federal loans. So for them, the situation was different. But everyone else, they got funding, through by applying directly. Actually, I mean, I think there are a couple that got the Fulbright, but most of them got funding directly through the universities.
Okay, that's good to know. Annaka, is there anything you want to add to what Bilal has said?
First of all, I just want to second the please don't take out a bunch of loans to get an MFA. It is a low return degree financially. This is to make yourself better as a writer. Thank you. That was an oversight not having that in my presentation, but I do want to highly underline that. And second of all, as far as funding goes, that is again something that you should be aware of going in. So ask those administrators. If it's not on the website, feel free to ask administrators. So like at BU, I said at BU, all domestic and international applicants get the same funding package. That is not the case at all schools. As an applicant, you have a right to know what you are spending money on to apply. and you have a right to know what you would be receiving if you are offered admission. So if you are unsure about any of those funding packages, or even possible funding packages, schools like NYU, I know, have a tiered system where they say our top applicant gets full funding, some of you get partial funding, some of you get no funding. You have a right to be aware of that going in. Even before you are offered, you have a right to know what you're applying for. So if you don't know, ask. You should feel as empowered enough as an applicant to ask those questions, because this is your time. Your time is valuable. I don't want you spending 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours working on those statements, working on filling out all those forms, paying those anywhere from $25 to $90 application fees for something that was not plausible for you from the beginning. So make sure you ask about that stuff. There is someone at that school who is being paid to field questions like that. So please don't be shy. Make sure you ask whatever you need to ask before you hit that submit button.
All right. Thank you. Okay, I think we can just go to questions now, and we don't have time for too many, but I think we can take around two or three. The first one is there were a bunch of questions around this topic. So here especially, there's this perception that writing is kind of a solitary thing, and that you learn as you go or life teaches you. But I wanted to ask you guys, how did the structure of the MFA and then the mentorship of the professors who taught you, how did that help? Like, do you feel significantly that that actually made you better writers when you came out of it?
I definitely do. I came out of it quite recently, and I think I'm still in the process of going through and unpacking everything that happened. But I think, as Bilal said, being able to walk into that room and give your work up for review and critique from other people certainly builds community within your peers. But then having those professors who know your work, have seen your work from the application stage, and watch your work grow until you turn in that final thesis is extremely helpful. And those are the people who will be able to offer you both large scale feedback that allows you to look at these projects and at yourself on a more zoomed out scale, I suppose, and that granular feedback that can be the things that changing perspective, changing a detail, these are things that can completely alter the way that a story plays out or a poem reads. So I think I certainly benefited from that in a way that I did not benefit from my studies as an undergraduate in English or from less formal workshopping with friends.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's tremendously helpful actually, because I think when you are working by yourself, you can go down that route, and obviously many writers do. You have to spend a fair bit of time and effort trying to figure out so the the biggest problem for a writer, especially for a younger writer, or by a younger writer, I mean, somebody who's starting out, is that it's very difficult to judge your own writing. It's very, very difficult to see, like literally see what you're doing, what you have on the page. And so having someone, look at it and simply tell you what you have done, just make you more aware of language, more aware of, structure, more aware of, form, all of these things that perhaps you do not consider when you are writing, those, and then obviously your journey as a writer is really coming into greater awareness of all of these elements. That's why writing becomes harder actually, the more, and not just writing, this is true for any practice, you can say the same for music or yoga or whatever. The more you become aware of it, the more choices you have, and hence, in a sense, it becomes more difficult. So, because you have to now consciously exercise all of those choices. Earlier, you were just simply following your instinct, and perhaps writing out of biography, and you're simply writing whatever is coming to your mind, or this is something that you just saw or heard or whatever. Right. But I think that journey where you become more aware and you become more conscious of what you are doing, that is really, a journey that all artists have to make. Now, you can make that journey by yourself as well, right? But it requires enormous amounts of effort and time actually, and you can really cut that out significantly if you come into mentorship of someone who's more experienced, who's a more experienced practitioner, and they can literally make you see what you have done and what you have written, and help you kind of figure out your problems. What are the problems in your, not problems in the sense that there's something wrong in it, but what is it that you are, what's the question in your work, what are the questions in your work, that your work is asking, and then help you navigate those questions, not in terms of finding the right answers, but helping you, giving you tools to grapple with them. Again, I'm sorry if this sounds too abstract, but I'm happy to elaborate and kind of make it simpler, break it down if you may. But short answer to that is absolutely. I learned tremendously when I was in an MFA program, and again, they've been formative to my own self as a writer and my own practice as a writer.
Okay, that actually makes sense. Just going off of that, another question we got was, did you two come out of the MFA program with like some work that you were proud of or that you could publish?
Yeah, I think that's every writer's goal, right? It's like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna have this thesis and it's gonna be good. I think BU's program is, being the 1 year, I certainly didn't come out feeling like I completed a book. However, I came out with 40 pages of poetry that I'm confident in, that I have, because I just graduated, I've just begun submitting. But I am getting good feedback on, and feel confident they will find their home in some publications that I read and enjoy, which is a nice feeling, because going in, I was like, my best shot is like maybe some blog on Twitter. But feeling good about that now. Yeah, I definitely do.
Yeah, I mean, that was my book.
Oh, that's awesome.
It took 2 more years. Okay, so it wasn't like I had a thesis, but it took another couple of years and a fair amount of revision and writing for me to turn that into a book. But that was my novel that I wrote. Yeah, and I think that, as Annaka said, that's really the aim, that you should come out of your program in this kind of intense period of studying or thinking about writing with something that is publishable. Um, and yeah, I think that fortunately happened with me.
There you go. There's the incentive to apply. Another question was, Bilal, this is I think specifically for you. So, what do you think is the scope of writing in the English language in Pakistan?
So the truth is, I do not know. If by scope you mean financial rewards or something of that sort, no, there is very little. I mean, if you're going to look at it writing like that, but because I always think of it this way. I mean, forget about English. I mean, what's the scope of writing in Urdu, for example, or Punjabi, or for example. I mean, there is no scope, right? I mean, unless you are writing for television or you are writing for, these mass market bestsellers in Urdu. I mean, what's the scope? I mean, I don't think there is much scope. In fact, Urdu publishing is most books publish in a print of 500, and they take, 2 or 3 years to sell those books. So again, we are not talking about big bucks here in any language. But I think that,
No, we can't hear you yet.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, I think, sorry, somebody turned on the speaker and everything shifted there. So my apologies. What was I going to say? Yeah, so the scope question. No, I mean, I think that I kind of look at being a writer in this country as really an act of improvisation. So you have to improvise, you have to figure out an economic means to support yourself, and you have to then find a lifestyle that supports this practice of writing. I think that that's true for most writers everywhere. In fact, I mean, writing does not pay bills for most writers anywhere around the world, unless you're living in Scandinavia or in Finland, where the state will happily pay you a lot of money to translate books. So it's not going to happen. And again, everywhere, I think we have to improvise, and we have to figure out ways to sustain ourselves economically, and while having a chunk of quality time that we can dedicate to the practice of writing, and to improve ourselves as writers. Yeah, and I think that again, the other thing that perhaps is not your question, but I'm going to pick on it anyway. Do not get too fixated on writing in English. You can write in other languages. That avenue is available. Do not close off that avenue to yourself. The realities that we write about are not English, right? And so perhaps the form that we need to think about are multilingual, they're bilingual, instead of monolingual, which is English, which accommodates for a very small part of our actual lived experience. So perhaps think of writing as something much broader than this one language, which is English. So I know we have there are all these post-colonial conundrums of having been educated in English and all of that. But don't kind of, again, the practice is to break out of that and to kind of evaluate your options seriously, especially as a writer. In terms of what language are you going to express? You have multiple languages, you express yourself in all your languages. Why do you want to restrict yourself? Sorry, that was a tangent.
No, that was super helpful. Thank you. Annaka, just a last question for you. This is something that people are asking repeatedly, even though I think you've covered it. So there are no prerequisites required for an MFA degree. Is that correct? Like someone from an engineering background can just apply?
Absolutely. So most schools will require you, just for the sake of proving that you are capable of graduate study, to have an undergraduate degree. However, the field usually, it's going to depend program to program, but at BU, we do not care. As long as your writing sample is arresting, that is what we are evaluating you on. Also, please keep in mind that if you are someone who did not pursue an undergraduate career degree, but may have had significant educational experience, some schools will allow that to stand in as equivalent. So we have had applicants who have said, I didn't pursue an undergraduate degree, but I've had a career in publishing or in journalism for the past 20 years. And we have to fill out a couple of forms, but if their writing's good enough, we do. So focus on your writing sample. Your background is important to you as a writer and an important part of that personal statement, but the writing is what we are focused on.
Annaka, I have a question for you.
Go for it.
Okay, there's also a lot of anxiety I see in applicants who are graduating and were graduating undergrads. Let's put it that way. And so because that their friends are applying and they have decided to apply to an MFA program, and so they will apply for the heck of it. And very often my advice to them is perhaps they should wait and develop their writing before they apply. But I think that there is this anxiety that people have that they should apply straight out of undergraduate. So I don't know if you can speak to that perhaps.
Yeah, so I will say that I applied straight out of undergraduate, but that is rather uncommon, at least at BU's program. I know usually we have, in the cohort of 18, 1 to 3 students that came straight out of undergraduate, but the majority of students did not. And I think for the reason you said, give that work time to breathe, time to develop. Applying to MFAs is really expensive. I was thankful to have a little bit of support in paying my application fees, but it was still a lot. I applied to 16 schools. I was also one of those anxious undergrads, but really what it comes down to is, again, the writing sample, and you are going to have a much better chance at getting into more schools. If you give that sample time to mature, I mean, as writers, we know this. Sometimes the best thing to do is put it on the desk and leave it there for a week and then come back to it. If you give yourself time to focus on that craft, you will get better results. It's like anything else. The more you practice, the better the output will be. So if I always tell students, if you feel confident, go for it. I did, and it worked out for me. But if you have any doubts about that sample, give it a year. The MFA program will be there in a year. You'll just be a better writer going into it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Annaka. And I think that's all the time we have. So we won't be taking any more questions. But if you have any questions, write to us and we will get you the answers, or we can connect you to Annaka, Bilal, if the question, requires that. Thank you so much for being here, Annaka, Bilal. Seriously, this was super helpful and super thorough. Thank you. I will touch base with you after the session. I will email you. This was a kind of a tricky time to take out, 7 to 8 here, and Annaka, super early in the morning for you. So we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you to the attendees for listening in.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good evening, everyone.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.